Either that or I'm being trolled so hard
I don't
for
know how
this
I
many
called him
years.
Dan DeVito. What's going on, guys? The NBA betting market video for January the 22nd, 2021. Fat guy, let's start off with the Bulls Hornets game. 680 bets so far. The Hornets open as 3-point favorites. They're still 3-point favorites. The juice has moved towards the Hornets, though, from minus 102 to minus 107. 40% of bets have been on the Hornets. However, 91% of the money is on the Bulls. What is up with that?
Well,
Well,
I come
I'll
on now. There you go.
Okay, I see it now.
We know what the
money
show
line,
is. We know what the
money
show
line,
is.
minus 145 for the Hornets. Bet up to minus 149. 45% of bets. 99% of the money. So Vegas is in trouble here if the Hornets win by 1 or 2 points.
Unless the handle of the spread is considerably larger than the money line, which I imagine that it is. Let's be real here. Hornets money line, like what made the pros like the money line so much better on the Hornets, right? Because I don't know when the money line opened for the Hornets. I imagine it's more incongruent with like -3, minus 105 or something like that. Or maybe it just opened at -3, minus 107 and got bet up to minus 149. Like it's very I'm not sure exactly how it lines up, but it looks like they do probably. I think they're probably balanced here, to be honest. I don't know if that 99% figure is necessarily accurate, but it could be something like 80 something. Do you know what I mean? And don't forget, 80 something still means a lot of still means exposure on the Hornets considering the juice, right? So you'd need a much different percentage there. I don't exactly have it off the top of my head. But anyways, I suspect this market is balanced between the two.
Yeah.
But it feels like a lot of Hornets tickets just have a lot of like Hornets parlay tickets. So I feel like the Hornets are on a lot of parlay tickets. So that perhaps is accruing for a lot of that value. Whereas the Bulls, that might be the play as far as pros go because you have more dollar per volume. I mean, you do on the Hornets as well, but that might be I feel like that's more of a square parlay idea. That's just my thoughts on it. But this is more than likely a balanced market if we were to guess.
Well, what's interesting to me is that what we found looking at these markets early on in 200-something games is that usually if there is more money on the spread, usually the lines move in favor of the spread money more so than the money line money.
Yeah.
So what this is showing us here is that it's a very, very, very slight move. This is not much of a move at all towards the Hornets on the spread and money line, with Hornets money coming in on the money line, whereas the Bulls money is coming in against the spread. So it's interesting to note that as well. Obviously,
absolutely.
And like Fat Guy said, we do have to make some assumptions though on that. I'm just going to skip over because I'm just going over the same points he did. The OU opened at 228. It's been bet up to 228.5. However, heavy juice on the under at minus 110 currently. 41% of bettors, 46% of the money on the under. Fat Guy, what do you make of this?
Well, one thing I want to notice here, minus 104, minus 106. There's one extra point of juice. Huh. That a little strange there? Because see, like between the two is 210, right? That's 211 between the opening juice and the current juice.
Yeah, we usually see the opposite where sometimes they'll open it up with a little more juice and then bet it down. This just might be one of those things where it's like a rounding thing on Pinnacle and they're just making their little extra, 0.1% or whatever it is.
Think of our lives. How much of our financial lives have been affected by little things called rounding? I don't know. I see stuff like that, and it's just a weird little tidbit. I have no idea what it actually means, but it's well, if I were to guess, is that they're like, we can charge more juice on this game and no one will notice. That's the way I look at it, but that's a little bit weird. I haven't seen that in some time. I mean, this is, I guess, technically I don't know if this is a movement at all, realistically.
Well, it actually looks like a reverse line. Like the line has moved up half a point, but the juice makes it look like it's actually a reverse movement because of the juice.
And considering the low volume on this game, 680, I doubt that like any threshold has been passed for a movement. So maybe they're just, you know what I mean, just calling one thing another by just switching the half point and adjusting the juice to try and incentivize more market action. That's my guess on that.
And with there being so little bets on this OU and these bet percentages and money percentages being so close, this is just a market where the Fat Guy and I would see this market and eliminate it right away because there's just no value really either way. Even when you look at all these micro
Look
little
deeply.
movements.
Well, I mean, best case scenario, you have a good price, perhaps in theory, on the Bulls at -103, but it's not jumping out at me. Let's put it that way.
Up to the next game, which is the Magic Pacers. 870 bets so far. Pacers opened as 4.5-point favorites. They've been bet down to 4-point favorites at -107. 64% of bettors are on the Pacers. However, only 20% of the money is on the Pacers. So this makes sense. 80% of the money has helped push that line down 0.5 point for the Magic.
Yeah, it did. I mean, that looks like a lateral movement here. It's not quite a full 0.5 point because you're still incentivized more so to take the Magic at that number 4 than the Pacers, considering the juice considerations. But what is interesting here, though, is I think they probably achieve balance when you can take the money line into consideration. There is more money on the spread, but in the on the Magic rather. But the Pacers, look, they did 85% of the money on 67% of the bets on the money line.
What's interesting to me is that the money line has moved in favor of the Pacers, whereas against the spread, it's moved in favor of the Magic. So I was just going to double check to see when these lines have actually moved, because my guess is that the money line market probably came out a little bit later than this. So I'm just going to.
I would guess that as well, right? Because they don't always match up, like the timings. So the movement isn't exactly like you're looking and you're like, wow, that doesn't really make sense. But the money line might come out after the spread line. I always find that interesting. Why is it delayed? I'd like to know that reason. If anyone has any theories, we would most certainly entertain them in the comments section. But I'd like to know why.
Another thing I'm going to jump out at is that this -165 was actually a 3.5. So from 3.5 to 4, -165 to -173. That's in line with that. So this is a game where the line had legs, as I've heard, from 4.5 down to 3.5, and it's been
Bounce
pushed
up.
back up to 4. So there was some sharp action, it looked like, on the Magic against the spread early, and then there's probably some buyback on the money line after that line moved down.
On the Pacers at 165, that's probably what happened. So see what I mean? How tight these are. Look at the resistance points. Buy the Magic at 4.5. Drive the price down, and then there's some speculators on the Pacers waiting. Boom! Hammer the Pacers when it crosses their resistance point. Bam! Goes back up to the Magic. It's like you have. It's just very interesting. It's very, very interesting to see where resistance points are, and what that tells me then, if there's resistance on one point of the Magic on the high end and on the Pacers at the low end, where are we now? We're probably at equilibrium, right? Because if either side's hammered both ends of that spectrum, the middle is where you're just going to lose money, right? Like you had to be on either side. And it was probably plus EV, I would imagine. Maybe one so more than another. And again, whatever happens in this game is irrelevant. It's what this game, the iterations of this game. You're going to simulate this game a million times, and you got price X, i.e. Pacers -165 or Magic plus 4.5 -105. Both of those might be positive EV. There is a very, very reasonable chance, right? So what that tells me, though, is if both, like I said, if both polls are set on those two prices, the one in the middle is the loser, and that's what we have here. So this is for sure a play that has strong market indicators not to bet, if anything.
The OU for this game opened 217.5, still at 217.5, but the juices favored the under from -106 to -109. 61% of bettors, 59% of the money has helped move that juice. All
Pretty
this stuff
standard.
is standard. So we'll move on to the Rockets-Pistons game, which has been talked about a lot today in the Discord. If you guys are interested, we do have a YouTube membership that includes a Discord channel where we all talk betting stuff for all the different sports. And the Rockets-Pistons has been a very hot topic today. 567 bets so far, so not a lot of bets early on in this game. The Pistons open as 3.5-point favorites. They've been bet down to 3-point favorites. However, there's heavy juice on the Rockets. So this line has actually moved more than 0.5 point. Looking at that. So possibly this line could hit 2.5 fairly soon. 82% of the money is on the Rockets, and then 45% of bets on the Rockets. Fact, I'll quickly do the money line as well. Pistons open -144, bet down to -138. 61% of bettors are on the Pistons, and then the money is split 50-50. So the books are taking some exposure here on the Rockets, and they have moved the line to try to encourage bettors to bet on the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah, that's so weird. But there is that, like, I'm still trying to understand this. Like, -3 plus 103, right? Like, that's pretty. Is that enough, right? Like, where's the, like, but it's you're still losing that half point. You know what I mean? So I want it. Like, that's the thing. That's knowing a value of a point, right? Like, what is that value of that half point? What does that actually mean? Like, this could actually be positive. Like, that 8 points of juice of -105, the plus 103 at -3.5 to -3, that might be worth in the half point from 3.5 to 3, right? So very interesting. Weird to even see the Pistons as favorites, eh?
It sure is. I guess you and I haven't watched any of these games, but the Rockets losing James Harden, I'm not sure if there's like Ewing theory there where the Rockets could play better. I highly doubt it. So it's interesting to see here, but this is one of those games in the NFL where I would say this is going to be a 5-star entertainment game because nobody cares about these two teams. People in Detroit can barely watch the Pistons play. And I know people in Houston are probably just tuning out and watching Brooklyn Nets games now because a lot of them are probably Harden fans. Who knows? The whole thing is, though, is that this is going to be a close game, most likely. It's most likely going to be a close game and going to be an entertaining game, one that you'd want to watch the last 5 minutes. It might not be pretty, but it's going to be close, and it's going to be interesting if you're betting on that game.
I'm just very, very, very interested in what whether there's an overreaction to the Rockets. Like maybe the pros like the Rockets and the Joes overreact because, you know, Rockets minus a star means that they'll get beat by anybody, but that's usually not the case at all. Because that's another thing about betting on sports is every other guy is a professional athlete. Every other guy on the Rockets is better than anyone you know that plays basketball. So it's like you're not just putting, like, yeah, there's scrubs, but they're still professional athletes. Do you know what I mean? And they're not playing world beaters either. Like, this isn't like the idea of star removal just tanks someone's win percentage by, you know, whatever the facet is from what the standard line would be between the Rockets normally with Harden to without is probably overvalued, is my guess.
On to the OU for this game. It opened at 216.5. It's been bet down to 214.5. Juice is on the over though at -107. 41% of bettors, 83% of the money is on the over, despite this line moving down 2 points.
Wow. You know, but that's interesting to me though that 83% of the money is on the over. Like, wouldn't you think though, if following that same logic, that maybe this is sharp money because maybe the only people participating in this OU, because generally squares like OU overs, and they're gonna have the logic that the over under isn't set properly because James Harden is out, which obviously that is very out. He's not on the team anymore. That's very much baked in. So I actually think there might be some sharp action on the over, despite there perhaps being reverse line movement. This is one of the more interesting markets. I'm not going to be wagering on it, but I'm going to be monitoring it. That's for sure.
I'm just quickly checking to see if there's any news on players being out because there is some interested. There's reports of a trade today, so maybe the Rockets might be losing some players due to a trade. Either way, this isn't what the show's about. So we're going to move on to the Celtics Sixers game, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time start. 605 bets. Sixers open as 4.5 point favorites. They're still 4.5 point favorites. The juice has barely moved. Interesting to note, though, that 61% of bettors, 86% of the money is on the Celtics against the spread. Conversely, the line has moved in favor of the Celtics on the money line, plus 173 to plus 163. They have received 59% of bets on the money line. However, 74% of the money has been put on the Sixers money line. So this might be equilibrium on both sides as far as ATS and money line between Celtics and
depending
Sixers.
on the handle, right? So I would imagine that there's more money ATS, but it's again being battled by perhaps parlay tickets, Which is the funny thing too. This is what I think. I think the money percentage is far lower on the money line, but I bet you the number of bets on the money line, like that bet volume, is higher than it is ATS, if that makes sense. Because I think there's more bets. Like there's way more. I'm gonna say 5 to 10 times amount per bet on ATS would be my guess. Because a lot of parlays are $2 tickets. So I mean, if you split that up between 6 teams, in theory, right? So that would be really, we're betting in the cents there, right? So I would imagine that it's something like that. Interesting market, though, nonetheless, with 86% of money on the Celtics, dollars per volume. Yeah, very interesting one. I don't know. This could be a pros Joe's game. Pros like Celtics to cover, Joe's like Sixers to win. That's kind of what it is looking like to me, perhaps.
And then the OU, there's been barely any movement other than the juice pushing towards the under from minus 105 to minus 112 on a total of 222. 17% of bets have been placed on the under. However, 97% of the money on the under, fat guy.
That could be one large account realistically, because the betting volume in total between the three markets is 605. So 97% of $10,000, you know what I mean, $9,700. Like that's pretty reasonable, right? Like I think a whale could shift this one. So I don't really like when the figures are that high, but it is a possibility. All things considered. It's supposed to, especially too, because parlay tickets could include OUs, right? So like I imagine if some pro bet like, or whale, could always be a whale. Whales are uninformed. That's why we have to betting. The amount of money bet isn't always the greatest indicator. That's why you need a larger volume to kind of be able to decipher between consensus pro money or whale money, right? Because you got guys like Dave Portnoy, the Barstool guy, as he's been mentioned in our Discord. He a very large bettor, but I'm sure he's very much a whale. Maybe sharpened only because of his influence, but there are guys like him out there, just not that many. So perhaps here also too, there's a big difference too. Whales can get down more money than pros can. Because think about it this way: you're a sports book, and especially you're one that is selective with customers. Let's say, which is it's not a thing that Big Rye endorses, but it does happen, right? So they're more likely to let the guy who plays craps and slot machines and roulette to make a large bet than a guy who comes in with a black coat and a black bag, right? So he's going to have a higher limit, tends to be. And perhaps maybe he's doing it because he has an interest in Penn National Gaming. But I mean, this is department from the show, but it's not one of those rants. So point being is that money percentage can be swayed under low volume. That's why the market factors are stronger when there's higher volume, because then you can find consensus pro money and make better informed decisions, because that's what we do here. Decisions, not results.
On to the next game, which is the Heat Raptors. 680 bets so far. Raptors opened as 2.5-point favorites. They've been bet down to 2-point favorites at minus 108. 55% of bettors are on the Raptors. However, 73% of the money has helped push that line down to 2. Conversely, on the money line, Raptors from minus 137 to minus 130, 63% of bets. 80% of the money is on the Raptors. So we're weird. There's been a trend today of people taking money line favorites and underdogs against the spread. There's going to be a lot of Vegas middle opportunities, as I like to say.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, I guess the Heat winning though. It all depends though on handle. We don't have that number. We don't know the handle. So making that assumption is just pure speculation. So, but it is interesting. He is right. The markets are oscillated, which I don't know. It's kind of a bummer for us because there's no consensus pick for any of these realistically.
On to the OU. It opened 219. It's been bet up to 221.5. Juice on the under though at minus 107. 36% of bettors, 53% of the money is on the under. So interesting to note here that the OU moved up 2.5 points, considering that the money percentages are even, but maybe they pushed this up to encourage equal betting on both sides.
Well, and then maybe they got it. You know what I mean? Maybe they got 221.5, because I would imagine that most of that money is going to come on a good number, because it's hard to find pros that bet unders. They know what the number is. They're not just going to fire it out if they don't think 219 has value. But I would imagine if it crept up to 221.5, it's probably when they saw the opening line at 219, they go, I'm not touching this game. and then bingo, it hits 221.5. Well, there you go, unload the clip, and that's probably where you got this money percentage from. Again, only 680 bets though for this game.
On to the Nets Cavs, which is the most bet game
Rematch
of the night. I know that Kevin Durant, it's reported that he is going to be out for this game. So that's why the money line and spread are very different than they were when they played just recently. 1,059 bets. I'm not sure if I already mentioned that. Nets opened at 7, minus 105. Bet down to minus 6.5 at minus 106. 63% of bettors are on the Nets against the spread. However, 72% of the money is on the Cavs against the spread. And then conversely, Fat Guy, this trend continues. The Nets open minus 278. The line has moved against them to minus 242 on the money line. 44% of bets. However, 91% of the money is on the Nets to win outright.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, but again, a reverse oscillation. Well, no, it's the same, right? It's an oscillation of markets. The money is on the dog ATS, and the money is on the favorite money line. I guess that's kind of been the theme for the day. I'm trying to make something of it, but I'm not really seeing a consensus idea. You could posit the theory that perhaps I don't know if it's sharp or square money, but people thinking, oh, the Cavaliers, they won the game outright in overtime. Why couldn't they cover a 7-point spread, right? And maybe Kevin Durant, like that's another thing. You can put a value on the player. The win probability between, what was the line last time? 10? I believe it was 10.
It opened at 9.5 and it was bet up to 10.5 by close.
Okay, so let's say how much in win probability? Because so what you do is you figure out the win probability between, let's say 9.5, 10, or 10.5 compared to the current line now, or the opening line 7 to 6.5. You can do it. You can timeline them so you can do it that way, and then figure out, is Kevin Durant worth the gap in win probability? I don't like using points. Some people do because of the ease of use, but because points added at different stages mean different things. More so in the NFL because of the uneven scoring, touchdowns and field goals, where NBA is a little bit more linear. Do you know what I mean? Because most buckets are 2 or 3, right? It might be slightly changed on key numbers because certain teams shoot 3. Anyways, we can get in that whole thing again. It's even stuff that we don't even dust off because it's so far in the future, the math on that. But point is, it's good to know how much a player like Kevin Durant is worth by comparing the two markets and figuring out the win probability between two different separate teams. That's a good thing to calculate. That way, next time he does get injured, you can see if there's value going one way or the other, considering if there's undercompensation, but usually overcompensation for an injury, for instance. So across this market, though, I can't say for sure because, again, they would just be pure speculation. But I did want to hammer on the understanding the math implications of a star. Because when say, oh, a star is out, I'm going to bet on the Cavaliers. That doesn't make any sense. You don't bet the team. So then you're going to take the Cavaliers as favorites then if Kevin Durant's out? No, you aren't. It's because you bet the number. But what does that number mean? How much win probability is Kevin Durant worth? Everyone at home, if you're doing this, I highly encourage you, because putting in the math like Big Rye does every day sharpens you quite a bit because you understand what everything is worth. Because not just knowing the value of a point, but knowing the value of a player is also key in future situations.
And the one thing I'll add to that, just for the viewers at home that do want to do that, to make it a lot easier on yourself, it's way easier to use the money line than it is to use against the spread, because money line, you're just going to get a straight up win percentage. So Nets minus 242 is like, I don't know, around 70%. And I believe last time they were like minus 500, which is around 83%. So you can see there that Kevin Durant makes about a 13% win difference.
Roughly. You can find it out to the number. You can do the
exact math. I'm just doing rough estimations in my head.
Yes.
But that gives you guys an idea of how you could measure how strong a player is. Because also, on top of that, the money line difference is going to be different whether, the spread starts as a pick'em, because a pick'em, 13%, so from 0 to 63% might be like 0 to 3.5. Whereas this line here goes from 6.5 to 10.5. So it could be a bigger jump depending on the points, because points are worth different amounts as you get away from 0. Yeah. On to the OU for this game. It opened at 226. It's been bet down to 224. The juice has been heavy on the under for both at minus 112 to minus 113. 36% of bettors and 39% of the money is on the under. So it's interesting here to note that they not only pushed the line down, but they kept the juice really juicy for people thinking, why can't this game go over 224 at plus 102? And 64% of bettors, 61% of the money is on the over. This actually seems like one of the more realistic OU markets that we've seen. It could just be because there's more bets, 1,059 bets, but I find this very interesting.
Absolutely.
This is a heavy reverse line movement.
Yeah, and they're really incentivizing it too. And not only that, this is another thing. Remember I said they added a point of juice on one of the previous games? They did it again, but they didn't do it in favor of against the where they're getting money. They did it against the under. So they moved it 2 points, and then they added a point of juice because I guess, rounding, as Big Rye would say. I don't know. Something's looking very attractive here because one side is probably way off the mark. And I understand getting under 226 at minus 112 is far more favorable than getting under 224 at minus 113. But perhaps we needed that shift to get the information to even make the bet, even if it is not as strong as it once was.
And I know there was a lot of talk in our Discord chat about the Cavs under first half, and I think this really does support it as far as the total game goes, 224. There's just so many market factors there telling you to bet, like trying to encourage us to bet the over, which makes me think this is fishy and there's probably value on the under because of that reverse line move and contrarian theory play. Onto the Hawks Timberwolves, 718 bets for this 8 p.m. Eastern time start. The Timberwolves opened as 6.5 point underdogs at home. They've been bet down to 6 point underdogs at home, minus 112. 55% of bettors and 60% of the money is on the T-Wolves against the spread.
Yeah, I mean, that's a natural. It's not really a full half point because they're de-incentivizing you. Oh, actually, it's more than a half point, rather. Sorry. Minus 110 to minus 112. So, interesting maneuver there. Yeah, I guess that 60% is carrying more weight. But we have to compare it always to the money line here. And we're going to see that's a similar story that we've been seeing all day today, Big Rye.
Yeah, 75% of bets and money are on the Hawks from minus 215 and minus 204. The one thing to note, though, that both of these markets, 75% on the Hawks at minus 204, is actually pretty much equilibrium with 60% of the money on the Timberwolves at minus 112. So it's very, very interesting to note that here because this really is probably equilibrium with this line moves. There might be just slightly more money against the spread, and that's why the line has moved in favor of the T-Wolves. But this, it looks like there might be some juicy opportunity on both sides, but really the books seem like they're just going to win no matter what.
They have a solid line, right? So it's probably negative EV in both ways. And like I mentioned, I mean, probably the handle for the ATS is a little bit higher. And this is probably a balanced market again, like a lot of these. That's the problem why, when you do your homework, as the year goes on, they get a lot better. They really do.
Yeah, they do. So that's when, ironically, I know this happened at the NFL, when they got better, though, and we got tighter with what we were doing, we had more success. So not that that's going to translate here in the NBA, but it was just an interesting thing to note that.
Well, because the plays that are available are very strong, right? Otherwise, there's just a lot of no plays. Like that happens. What he's right. A good example is NFL playoffs. Is those are just sharp markets. Actually, getting a bet down is with a reasonably positive EV bet is extremely difficult. Because not to mention NFL is it's probably the sharpest market there is, and NBA not quite on the same level, but it's not that far behind. But as the year goes on, you should be making less and less bets, believe it or not, which is unfortunate.
And then the OU for this game, it opened at 223.5. It's been bet up to 225.5. Juice on the under, though, at minus 109. 62% of bettors, 58% of the money is on the under, despite that line pushing up 2 points and them trying to incentivize you to bet that over. Yeah,
and absolutely, yeah. So it's a little bit interesting there. I love when they do this juice shift here because you wonder, what are those values? Again, figure this out on your own. What is the value of a point? Interesting stuff.
On to the Mavs Spurs game, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time start, 605 bets, so not a ton of bets for this game. The Spurs open plus 2.5 at home. They've been bet down to 2 point favorites at home at even, so not much of a line movement there. 65% of bettors, 20% of the money is on the Mavs, though, on the road.
Yeah, and that's -2.5 to -2. That, but it's the juice shift, of -105 to -110. Again, knowing the value of a point here, 80% of the money on the Spurs. Interesting. I do have this might be exposure though. This might be the first game of the docket today where there might be exposure on a team. Big Rye, considering we can't see the money percentages, but it is plausible that there is more money on the Spurs as underdogs here in this money line market, correct?
Yeah, there's nothing that we can say that's guaranteed, but it is interesting to note that 78% of money line bets have been placed on the Spurs. So they have 80% of the money. They have 78% of the bets on the money line, but we don't know what the money percentage is on the money line, so we can't say for sure. So we can only make inferences, if that's even a word.
That is a word.
The line has moved in favor of the Spurs, so it looks like the books are just a tiny bit worried about
slight,
this.
Though.
It is very slight. It's almost like it hasn't moved at all.
But it's low volume, low handle, perhaps. The low volume usually means lower handle. So perhaps it is just a lateral move for what they usually do. But it is interesting to drum up theories on the Mavericks today.
Yeah, and it would be a lot more interesting, one, if we knew what the money percentage was on the money line, and two, when there are more bets, and because this game is going to finish off with 1,500 to 2,000, and you might be able to get a little bit more out of it when it's 100% of the market instead of 20 to 30% of the market. Onto the OU, which opened at 223. It's been bet up to 223.5, but heavy juice on the under at -112. So not much of a line movement at all. The bet percentage and money percentages are within 55-60%, so not much to talk about. That market is pretty much what you'd expect to see.
Standard.
On to the Knicks Kings, 10 p.m. Eastern time start. 643 bets for this game. The Kings opened as 4-point favorites, still 4-point favorites. The juice hasn't moved. 54% of bets, 54% of money is on the Knicks. Nothing to talk about there. That's all standard stuff. So on to the money line. Kings -171, bet up to -172, 49% of bettors, and 69% of the money is on the Kings money line. Slight exposure on the Kings money line, but that might be balanced out by the Knicks against the spread money. So really not a lot. I'm just going to skip over. There's nothing to talk about.
How sharp is that though? Hold on. How sharp is that though, that they're able to balance? This is why, sorry, I had to interject. He's completely right. This is a completely vanilla market. But if they're able to do this efficiently, why are there inefficiencies, and why do we look at it? Because what this is an example of, they have the choice. They have all the data. They know what they're doing. So especially the book that we're using for this type of all of these videos is the sharpest of the sharp. I won't plug it. You can obviously figure out which one it is. So if they're able to do this so efficiently, why do they choose to take exposure in other places? That's the things we look for. That's what we're interested in. Knicks Kings, you couldn't get me to bet.
And then the OU tells a whole different story. And the OU opens at 218. It's been bet up to 218.5. So they push that line up half a point. 71% of bettors are on the over since they've pushed it up half a point. But 92% of the money is on the under. Like, this makes no sense. Unless they want
people to bet the under. Do you know what I mean? Knicks Kings are probably of the lower scoring teams. I'd imagine they're the less successful teams, both of them. So that usually means less scoring in a scoring league. So perhaps this number looks like it's too high, but perhaps it's not at all. Perhaps there is value on the over considering the book's exposure, but we'll have a better snapshot of that closer to tip off.
And then on to the Thunder Clippers game, 870 bets. Clippers opened as large 13-point favorites. The spread hasn't moved at all. 51% of bettors, 72% of the money is on the Clippers. And take a look at the money line. Clippers opened at -1074, bet down to -997. 75% of bettors are on the Clippers. So what I will say is that the money line probably came out at a different time than the spread. But what's important to me is that Clippers against the spread have received 72% of the money, 870 bets, but the line hasn't moved. So it makes me think that there is value on the Thunder against the spread, because when the line doesn't move like this and there is heavy money on one side, it makes me think this is almost a reverse line movement. Like no line movement is almost a reverse line movement in this point, because they could make this Clippers minus 15 or minus 16 or minus 17 and make it 50-50 money. The only thing that we don't know, and the reason why we can't say for sure on this game, is that because we don't know the money percentage on the Thunder, like it only takes 30% of the money on the Thunder to make this whole theory go out the window.
Well, not quite collapse, because it depends. You don't know what the handle is on the ATS as opposed to the money line. So again, that would be two assumptions. So it doesn't quite go out the window. But what is of note, though, like Big Rye mentioned, the money line moves against the Thunder. So, I mean, the Clippers are less favorites here. Like, honestly, the weird thing is, though, is these when you go from 758 to 714 underdog, that's not a massive jump, even though it looks like it, because you'll count the points, right? You go, oh, what's that, 36 points? Or no, so it's 58. It's, 44 points. But it's 44 758s. That's not the same as moving from, even money to plus 144. That's not nearly the same thing, right? So, but it is interesting, though. It really is. They want you to bet on the Clippers. They do. They really want you to. And they're holding the line like Toto. And perhaps there is a bit more money on the Thunder money line. I would say that. That would be my guess. Because why else would you make that movement? But that spread market is so rock solid. It seems 870 bets to more than any of these other late games on the docket. I sound like Big Rye with all these acorns. But if you were to bet the Thunder, I would imagine that ATS is a far better price at 13 minus 105, because no matter what time it opened at, unless there was some unless this line had movement throughout the day, which I don't believe it is, it looks like they held strong. Even if I were to take a look at it. This makes me think that the Thunder, I hate to endorse plays, but Thunder plus 13 looks attractive. Let's put it that way.
To put this in perspective, because Fat Guy's talking about this line move is equivalent to essentially this line move here. So it's only
there you
it's
go.
only 0.8%, this line move. So it looks like a lot, but the further away you get from 1,000, it's like an exponential type of growth. On to the OU, still 219. It is interesting to note, though, for this game that 68% of bets and 79% of the money has been put on the over, but the juice very, very slightly has moved towards the under. So we have a reverse juice movement on the under in the Thunder's Clippers game at 219 points, despite 68% of bettors and 79% of the money being placed on the over.
Yeah, very interesting stuff here as well. Like, this is an interesting game. Because this has got to be a pros Joe's game too here, like, and don't forget, this kind of stacks as well. A stack is when you get both games. Like, it does make under in the Thunder make sense. Clippers in the over make more sense, right, at this number. So like those things usually positively correlate. That's another thing too. If you could parlay the two things, I always argue against it. Except single game correlation parlays, there can be value. So if you could parlay under and Thunder and the under, not to be alliterative, or I don't know what the term is necessarily, but those were probably positively correlated. If you got the standard juice and the perfect parlay odds, then I would 100% do it because of correlation. But point is, to get away from that, this shows about the market, and I think there is a heavy indication that the Thunder are more likely to cover the spread, and considering the juice flip-flop in a larger volume game, there's strong market indicators that perhaps the under is the better option. Interesting stuff here, Big Rye.
You cannot use the words money, down, Thunder, and under without me ripping a hole in these bike shorts. On to the Nuggets Suns, 567 bets for this 10 p.m. Eastern time start. Suns opened as 1-point favorites. They've been bet up to -1.5 at -103. 40% of bettors and 46% of the money. Not much to talk about there, so I'm going to skip right over to the money line. Money line's interesting, though, because the money line has moved in favor of the Suns from -110 to -113. They have received 64% of bets on the money line, but 95% of the money is on the Denver Nuggets. So let me bust out a theory for you, Fat Guy. Is it possible that the line has moved in favor of the Suns against the spread and on the money line? Because there's a possibility that the against the spread market might have 10 times the handle as the money line market.
Yes, exactly, right. So it could, it very well could. I mean, the one thing though is that it doesn't take a lot to move this market. There's 567 bets, Big Rye, so it's more elastic. Perhaps, even though there are threshold numbers, it still might be a little bit more malleable than some of the ones, considering how a few big bettors could influence it more so than other markets, considering such a low volume at 567.
And then onto the OU. The line hasn't changed at all. It's 219.5 at minus 104 on the under. 14% of bettors and 89% of the money is on the under. So it's interesting to note there that there's so much discrepancy between the bet percentages and the money percentages. On top of that, the line hasn't moved at all. So could this just be 567 bets and there's just not a lot of handle on this game as well, or on this market as well?
I think that's more likely the case. We'll get a better indication closer to tip off, but I think considering we don't have like data heuristics that are going to be able to predict where this market will go, those are very important if you can get them. Again, we're trying. When there's only so many hours in a day, then this would be a stronger indicator for us because we could make more sense out of it. But again, we're going to have to wait closer to tip off, but because of the low volume. Whereas I think the Thunder, despite it only being 203 more bets, I feel like that's a lot more strong of an indicator, right? Especially because of the time frame of it. Like 230 now is almost exponential, right? Because that means as it goes on throughout the day, more than likely this could finish almost double what the Nuggets Suns does. But that's a pure speculation guess, and that's even on volume. You know what I mean? That's just detracting from anyways. But I just think market factors are generally a lot stronger on this Thunder Clippers game than the Nuggets Suns, considering we don't have the forecastable. We have the data, but we don't have the forecasting technology, let's call it, to make an assumption on this market.
That is it, guys, for the NBA betting market for January the 22nd. Hold tight on our channel. We're going to have the NHL betting market live video out in probably 5 minutes or so.